something for 4 years. So a lot of communities are doing that. You all should think about it perhaps, So with all the doctors in this community, that should be like chump change, you know what I mean? Inshallah, inshallah. Ask Allah to bring scholarship in your community and raise the levels of literacy. You guys, what I want to talk to you all about today, I'm not going to talk for an hour. I feel like it's like adab to talk that long for people. So I'm going to keep it about maybe half an hour, and then I'll open up for Q&A if there are any questions you have, and inshallah we'll go with that. So what I want to talk to you all about today are two ayat in the Quran, where Allah says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. That day, Allah says, لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ. Your net worth that day will not help you. And your network will not help you. And the letters after your name are not going to help you. Whether it's MD or PhD, I was told MD is money doctor, PhD is a poor hungry doctor. I don't know if that's solid shelf. So that day, your children, your connections won't really bail you out. Then Ya Allah, what's going to help? Is there anything that will help? Allah makes an exception. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Except the one who comes to Allah with a Salim heart. With a heart that Allah describes in a state of Salim. Now what is that? Well, Salim comes from the Arabic root Salima Yaslam, which basically means peace and security. So for instance, a ladder in Arabic is called Sulam, because on those heights, if you're using a ladder, you're somewhat safe. So Salim captures the meaning of safety and security. So as if Allah is saying, the person who comes to Allah with a heart that is secure, that person has a chance. Now, what does it mean to have a heart that is secure? Well, and this is going to organize the rest of my talk. I like to keep it organized. So, folks, a heart that is salim or secure basically means two things. That's a heart that is secure in its relationship with Allah, and it's secure in its relationship with people. And those are the two ideas I want to talk to you all about today. What does it mean to have a secure relationship with God, and then secure relationship with people? So let's begin with having a secure relationship with Allah. A heart that has this say they're at peace with Allah. And that's another way I like to put it. Folks, a heart that is at peace with Allah, number one, has genuine love for Allah. And it has a genuine fear and awe of God. That reverence. Reverence so powerful, fear so powerful, it stops you on your tracks. When you have that kind of awe of Allah, when you feel chills thinking of God, I don't know if you all ever gone into nature, you're beholding the majesty of nature and you get chills. That's awe of Allah. And by the way, this one thing, I'm a big student of psychology. A lot of things that our deen asks us to do, like gratitude and awe, all of them are so incredible for your well-being. It's unbelievable. Like awe, there are many studies are coming out on awe right now. People who experience awe, they feel more connected to others, they have less mental health issues, and the list of benefits go on and on. Gratitude. Quran begins, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, as we know, right? All praise and gratitude to Allah. Right now, we don't know anything that is more correlated with your well-being than gratitude. It's unbelievable how I use the phrase science keeps catching up to our deen. Inshallah, they're getting there. They hit a few roadblocks along the way, but they'll get there, inshallah. So, a heart that has a genuine fear and love for Allah. Can I tell you a little story about a heart that fears Allah and has love for Allah? Consciousness, that mindfulness. At the time of Umar bin Khattab, he announced a decree where he said that people need to stop mixing milk and water just to maximize their profits. So what people do? They'll take a gallon of milk, put a bunch of water, and then sell it for a bunch of money. This happens in Pakistan till today, right? As we all are aware, yes? I saw it with my own eyes in Pakistan, because I grew up 13 years. By the way, I can talk about my people without my people getting offended, yes? Yes? Inshallah. So, in Pakistan, what they do? They import thermostats from China, and they remove the sticker and say made in Japan. And then they make a premium. And then the justification is, yaar, sab log kar rahe hain. To kya masla hai? So, there's always a justification, everybody is doing it. So this is our get out of jail free card, Everybody's doing it. It's just, bribes. Oh, that's the cost of doing business now. Anywho, Umar bin Khattab announced that decree. He's like, no more mixing milk and water. Now, as Umar did his nightly patrols that he was famous for, as he's doing patrols, there are loud voices coming from one particular apartment or building, where a mother is instructing her daughter, put more water. And she's like, Mom, for the love of God, did you not hear the decree of the Khalifa? And she's like, Khalifa is not here. You know what she said, the daughter? She says, Khalifa is not here, but the Rabb of Khalifa is here. I'm not doing it. She refused to obey the command of her mother. Not because her mom is asking her to wear loose jeans, you know, that's the command that gets refused now. You know, that's our struggle, you know? No. She's like, I can't do it. And this is a principle in our deen. There's no obeying the creation at the expense of obeying the creator. And subhanAllah, she stood her ground. That's a lady with a strong character, man. But the heart that's that mindful of Allah in the privacy of your home, that's amazing. You know, a heart that fears Allah is when you're standing in front of, you're standing in your bathroom and you're about to make wudu, and the tap is running, the water is flowing, and you shut it down because you're like, I can't wait this water. Allah ko jawab dena. You gotta stand in front of God. So in the most micro moments of your life, you're fearful of Allah. That's beautiful. That's true taqwa, you know? That's true mindfulness. And that's a heart, when a heart has that level of consciousness of God, that's a heart that's at peace with Allah. And that's what you and I have to develop in the most micro and macro moments of our lives, my dear brothers and sisters. Can I tell you another sign of a heart that is at peace with Allah? This is really important. That's a heart that's not comfortable sinning. Now, we as human beings, we're not going to be able to stop sinning. We all know. As we are hopelessly aware that we're all going to sin. Yes? But it's one thing to sin. It's another thing to justify the sin and say, you know what? What's the big deal? Times have changed. We're not in 7th century Arabia anymore. You know, we need to wake up and smell the coffee. You know, in the name of either modernizing Islam or like the fact that, again, it's being practiced by everybody. You don't want to become comfortable with sinning. You know, you hear this all the time. Why do I have to be so religious right now? I'll become religious when I'm 40. I'll do Hajj, and until then, just make dua for me, brother. You know, this is the sentiment that you tend to hear. You don't want to become chillaxed in the face of sinning. That's a dangerous place. It's one thing to privately battle an addiction. It's another thing to say it's no big deal. Because you remember in the story of the Genesis between Adam and Iblis, they both made a mistake, didn't they? Can I do a little pop quiz for you? What was the mistake of Adam alayhi salam? It's okay. You can answer the question. I promise I won't yell. Here we go. What was the mistake of Adam alayhi salam? He ate from the tree. Very good. Now what was the mistake of Iblis? Did he make any mistakes? He was asked to show honor to this new creation of Allah, Adam, and he said no. Now, our scholars say it's not the mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. Adam alayhi salam, imagine Adam alayhi salam is in Jannah. There are trillions of trees in Jannah. Everywhere you go. He's asked to avoid one tree. Which, by the way, the metaphor is powerful, isn't it? All sorts of drinks are open to us, except that one drink called alcohol. All sorts of meats are open to us, except that one meat called pork. You know, so you see it's like a training ground, what was happening to Adam alayhi salam. And he still goes ahead and eats. Now, Iblis also makes a mistake. But it's not the sin, it's their reaction to the sin. So, Iblis makes a mistake, Adam alayhi salam makes a mistake. What does Adam alayhi salam do when he's confronted with that sin? He says, Rabbana zalamna anfusana. Ya Allah, I've messed up. I've wronged myself. If you don't forgive me and show mercy to me, I'm done. Humbles down, lowers his ego, intellectually, emotionally humbles himself, doesn't go in with gun blazing, come on, shaitan trick me, and like outsource blame to everybody else, takes responsibility for his sin, and admits to Allah and owns up. What does Iblis do? He's like, first of all, he says, your command makes no sense to me. So he's logically arguing with that. God, who gave him logic, is going to use the logic God gave him to put God on trial, which is an interesting, I call it shooting yourself in the foot. You know, anytime people say, how's that fair? You know, you get this question a lot. How's that ruling Islam fair? I'm like, who gave you your sense of fairness? God. If God is the one who gave you your ability to judge fair and unfair in the first place, how are you going to use the sense of fairness God gave you to put God's fairness on trial? Because God is unfair, astaghfirullah, then how can you trust your own sense of fairness, which also came from God? You know, it's like you're in a defeating loop. But anyway, we don't want to get too philosophical right now. He says, your command doesn't make any sense to me. Your sense came from me. But that's the first problem with that logic. And then he says that after he was, he fell from grace and everything else, he's like, God, you misguided me. So, you misguided me, I will misguide them. And now he became resentful, became bitter, begrudging towards God, and that hatred fuels all that he does. It's not the same, it's your reaction to this. You do not want to become comfortable, my dear brothers and sisters, sinning. You know the Prophet ﷺ said? Hadith comes in Nasai. He says, when a person commits a sin and has no remorse, no big deal. Our scholars, they say when a sin becomes no big deal in your eyes, it becomes a big deal in Allah's eyes. When it's big deal in your eyes, it's a small deal in Allah's eyes. That's how the equation works. So, narration in Nasai says, if a person commits a sin and they feel no remorse, a black dot has been placed on the heart. Now, don't x-ray your heart to find this, okay? This is not a physical thing, right, folks? Spiritually speaking, a black dot has been placed on the heart, and it continues to grow until it envelops the heart. And now, you know the manifestation of that? This person will hear the best recitation, the best talk, they're not moved. The heart has been sealed. Khatm al-Quran night, everybody's crying, tears are flowing. This person cannot squeeze out a tear. That's a crazy place. At Janaza, everybody's in a solemn mood. This person is like, on their phone, on TikTok, laughing. Nothing moves. Nothing stirs and shakes. That's a dangerous spiritual state. Keep sitting. It's kind of like, I always say, our Desi people, we cook a lot of spicy food, right? But if you live in that house, where spice has basically crept into your walls even, let alone your clothes, when you come to the Taraweeh with those clothes, with samosas and pakoras sitting on your clothes, you feel it? But the Arab brother standing right next to you, he's about to faint. You know what I mean? Because your nose has been used to it. Your senses have adjusted. Well, guess what? Just as your eyes, you know how your eyes also adjust to darkness at night? Well, just as your eyes adjust to darkness, so does your heart. And that's a dangerous place to be in. Allah says you need to come to me. Don't show up on the day of judgment unless you have a Salim heart, a heart that is at peace. At peace, secured from hypocrisy, sinning, disobedience, being comfortable with sins. You show up secured from that, you're at peace with Allah. That's what we're looking for, my dear brothers and sisters. And one last thing I want to mention about a heart that is at peace with Allah, what I really want to focus on is also being at peace with people, because that's where, man, people get all tripped up. So, last sign of your heart being at peace with Allah is that you have good thoughts about Allah, especially in the middle of hardship. So important. That you don't let the negativity of life make you negative towards God. Husnul dhann billah. That's the actual concept. Always elevating your perspective of God. This is very, very important. And this is something the Prophet ﷺ told us, La yamutanna ahadukum. Let none of you die until you have amazing thoughts about Allah. Very, very critical for your spirituality. And folks, let me tell you why philosophically and logically that makes sense. Let's say you're upset at God because, you tore your ACL, or like business went down, or like a relationship didn't work out, or bad health report, whatever the situation is. You're like, God, how's that fair? I deserve better. That's your sentiment. So in other words, the hardship that occurred to you seems pointless to you. Most of us are okay with suffering that's justified, right? For instance, if you're an NFL player, you're going through torture day in and day out, right? But you don't care about that suffering because you're like, it's a justified suffering. Or like you have the dentist that's like drilling through your teeth, you feel a lot of pain, but you're okay with that because that's what you call justified suffering. Most of us get tripped up. We're like, how is this suffering justified? Why did this happen to me? Why me? Why me? I don't see a point. But then a lot of people make a leap. They say, just because I don't see a point, there can be no point at all. Just because I don't see the reason, there can be no reason. And that is a dangerous place to be in. So what you're saying essentially is that if I can't see something from my point of view, God cannot see that point either. You don't have some omniscient perspective that sees history from the beginning till the end that God does. Can I give you an example of how something may not make sense from one perspective but makes sense from another? Have you ever gone to a major airport? I'm sure Boston has one. When you're sitting in the parking lot, you see planes coming from all different directions, landing on this runway, landing on that runway, yeah? From your point of view, it's like a random collage of events that's unfolding. One plane is landing there at this time, at this altitude. Makes no sense from your limited perspective. But from an air traffic controller's perspective, it's a highly sophisticated, coordinated process, isn't it? It's kind of like when they see uncles, they first start watching American football. They're like just a bunch of dudes hitting each other, They're like, what is this game, Until you learn the game, reduce the knowledge gap between you and the process, then you're like, oh, I start to see trends now. So understand, as part of your intellectual humility, is that you got to recognize the knowledge gap that exists between you and the expert. Like in the case of an air traffic controller. So from your point of view, something seems random, but from his point of view, who's the expert, it makes sense. Same thing when we were sleep training our child. If you have gone through the sleep training process, man, it's a pain. That kid, my kid cried for 2 hours straight, protesting on the top of his lungs. Why aren't you here for me? We unfortunately waited till 15 months to do sleep training. Bad idea. So he kept protesting. 2 hours he cried. And his sentiment was, if I could translate it, the sentiment was, why would you do that to me? Why aren't you putting me to sleep? Why don't you rock me? From that child's POV, it's completely unfair. From our point of view, it's morally justified. Yes? Knowledge gap. So, because between us and Allah, there's a knowledge gap. Something may not make sense from your perspective, but it makes sense from Allah's perspective. And it makes sense, therefore, to have intellectual humility. That just because I don't see the point doesn't mean there's no point, period. Make sense, everyone? So, having good thoughts about Allah. One of our great scholars, Sufyan al-Thawri, was about to pass away. And on his deathbed, fear overtook him. He started to become a little negative, if you will. And he's like, will Allah forgive someone like me? Sufyan al-Thawri, man, oh, what a scholar. Like one of my favorites. He used to be called Ameer al-Mu'mineen fil Hadith. So when Sufyan is going through the sakaratul maut, he's almost in the jaws of death. And he's having these thoughts. So they summon another great scholar, Hamad ibn Salama, to the scene. And Hamad and Sufyan, they're very, very close. So Sufyan's about to pass away. Hamad, he's the one who's assisting him towards the end of his life. And Sufyan asks him, do you think Allah will forgive someone like me? You know what Hamad says? SubhanAllah. Look at the positive thoughts about Allah. Hamad says, on the day of judgment, if I had the choice of my parents doing my accounting versus Allah doing my accounting, surely I would choose Allah over my parents. Because God would be more fair to me and more merciful to me than even my own parents. That's a heart, that's Salim, that beautiful, organic relationship with God. And I ask Allah to give us that. The time to time we feel something when Allah's name is mentioned. That, you look at nature, you feel a sense of awe, sense of glory. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. So that's the first part of my talk. Those of you who are joining late, is showing up on the day of judgment with a qalbun salim, a heart that is at peace. Number one, peace, at peace with Allah. Now, the last part of my talk is being at peace with people. What do I mean by a heart that is at peace with people? That's a heart, folks, that is not infested with hatred, arrogance, supremacy. That's a heart that's not rotting with bitterness and resentment towards people. That's a heart that is gentle and tender, where you learn to empathize before you criticize, where you learn to connect before you correct, all that jazz. That is kind of what we're talking about, where your heart is secured and protected from spiritual viruses. And my dear brothers and sisters, this right here is where I feel religious Muslims and non-religious Muslims, non-practicing or practicing, we all struggle here tremendously. Where you'll have a Muslim who's praying 5 times a day, but in his heart, he's carrying so much deep-seated resentment and hatred. Can I give you an example? There was a sister who was telling me that she went overseas to visit her mother, an ailing mother, and her mother was not doing so well. Now, overseas, as she's visiting her mother, the in-laws are also there, So she is in and out of the hospital because of how sick her mother is. And she did not get the chance to meet her in-laws. And they were offended. Oh my God. And they, how they say in-laws are outlaws, there's always that joke that goes around. But anyway, the in-laws were so offended. And they were so bitter. And they felt so dismissed and belittled that they called the husband, who's still in America, and they're like, but Tamiz, she did not come and visit us. Where's hum khandani log hain? The whole shebang, right? And she's like, where is she? She doesn't have time for us. And they gave the husband an earful. Became bitter in the process, not realizing that she had a genuine excuse. And now this lady, now the ball is in her court. Is she going to let her heart become bitter towards her in-laws? And that's the big battle of life, folks. Do you let these blotches and smears gather on your heart because people drive you up the wall? Part of your spiritual struggle is to keep your heart at peace with people to the degree possible. I know it's very, very difficult. Let me give you an analogy that can really help secure this point. You guys know what homeostasis is, right? MashaAllah, we have a lot of doctors in the house, so hopefully everybody's aware. But those of you who, disappointed your parents and didn't become doctors, let me tell you what homeostasis is. Okay, so this is when your body maintains a temperature of 98.6, to be precise. And your body, if I can say, fights tooth and nail to maintain that. So if you are playing basketball or you're playing a sports and your body's temperature starts to heat up, the body produces sweat to cool the body down back to 98.6. So in either direction you're being pulled, body is going to bring you right back into that center. That's what you call physical homeostasis. Well, what I'm asking you to do right now, having a heart that is at peace with people, we need to achieve a level of what I call spiritual homeostasis for your heart, where events of life will pull you in that direction and that direction. People will say things. People will rub you the wrong way. People will get under your skin. And to a degree possible, you have to make sure that you don't let that creep so deeply in that you become bitter until that bitterness congeals into a grudge. And now it comes out at weird times. And folks, let me tell you, if you don't check your resentment levels and you don't talk it out or you cry it out to Allah or like address it with that person in a proper manner, what happens then? Imam Ghazali talks about this. He says when resentment becomes deep, then it starts to come out in really, really toxic ways. Let me share with you how resentment comes out. One of the first forms in which resentment manifests itself, if it's unaddressed, is in the form of jealousy. Where now you wish that person, you hope and you deep down wish that that person is robbed of their success and talents. Where you kind of low-key hoping that they fall and stumble. And like, so imagine you're like jealous of somebody and they just graduated from law school and you're like, and you hear about the fact that, oh my God, he graduated to the top of his class, and you're like, yeah, but all the lawyers are out of work, you hear somebody's doing good in the stock market. Yeah, but the stocks are going to tank. You're always that Debbie Downer, that negative Nancy who's finding a way to take a little jabs. But where are those jabs coming from? It's the resentments that's building in. Jealousy is first manifestation of that. The second one I kind of echoed earlier is, you enjoy seeing them fall and suffer or be embarrassed. So that person is giving a presentation and you're low-key hoping that they have a really embarrassing, freezing moment, And you're hoping that once again that person, does something that damages their reputation or career. You're waiting for them to slip. Not a good place to be. Here's another sign that resentment has gotten out of hand. You are agitated in their presence. You try to avoid that person. Your handshake is no longer as firm. Your hug is no longer as tight. The hand to the wallet when you're at the restaurant is not so quick. Signs that resentment is building. And eventually, folks, if this resentment goes out of control, it transforms itself into backbiting, lying, ridiculing, exposing their secrets, and tarnishing their honor. And we need to make sure that we are guarding ourselves before the situation goes that far out. And, I was just sharing with my community just a bit ago. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that's so profound. I want you guys to remember this hadith if you forgot everything else. Our Prophet ﷺ says, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْبُغْضَ. I caution you against bughda, which basically, bughda once again is ill feelings, angst, resentment you carry in your heart. He says, I caution you against bughda, these negativity and acrimony you hold in your heart. He says, why? He says, فَإِنَّهَا هِيَ الْحَالِقَةِ. Because this bughda is like a shaving blade. Except, he says, it does not shave off your hair, it shaves off your religion. What? Shaves off your religion. What does that mean? Meaning, this resentment will compel you to do sins against that person and dehumanize that person and justify sins and even crimes against that person that will turn you into a monster and you don't even know. That's where the stories of mother-in-laws versus the daughter-in-law, that's where those dramas and soap operas are made from. To what extent, to what injustice someone can be compelled to, and they feel they're completely justified. Because what's on the driving seat is their resentment and those grudges that are never addressed. Now, I always tell people, if you feel resentment, psychologically speaking, you have two options in front of you. You're either feeling resentment because, again, to be blunt and to be crude, you're either feeling resentment because you're being a little whiny and immature. That can happen. So your mom or dad are telling you to like shape up and like, get your homework and your grades straight, and you're like, they're always controlling me, and why are they always telling me what to do? Why are they so bossy? And you might get a little bit frustrated and resentful about that. Or your boss tells you that your project quality wasn't so good, and instead of like being mature and you're like, you know what, let me take it like a man, you become whiny and complaining. So if you're feeling resentful, you need to take a good stock of, am I just being immature about this? Do I just need to grow up and this will be fine? So that's the first possibility. The other possibility is that someone is actually walking all over you. They're abusing you. They're taking advantage of you. And that's a real thing that occurs all the time. If that's the case, you need to address it. Find ways of addressing. Either you address that person directly, you get another person involved. Do not let resentment go unchecked. And particularly those of you who are married, this is really, really important. Husband and wife, ups and downs occur. Your wife is doing something, your husband is doing something that rubs you the wrong way. And a lot of times what couples will do, right? They'll be like, yeah, but it's not worth fighting about. Goes unchecked, right under the carpet. Then something else occurs. Love conquers all, goes under the carpet. And next thing you know, 200, 300 issues have gone unaddressed, and now intimacy is taking a hit. Next thing you know, astaghfirullah, infidelity is on the scene. And then you're like, how could this person be cheating on me? I take care of his kids. What about the monster that was growing in your home that was never addressed, never confronted? So make sure that you're taking the proper steps necessary to check resentment. Either it's coming from you, and you need to shape up, or genuinely someone is taking advantage of you, and that's where you have to make sure that you are doing what you're doing. I'll mention two more things, and then my talk is done. One thing I absolutely love about the approach of our Prophet ﷺ, he used to tell his companions. Hadith comes in Abu Dawood. So profound. So remember, this is the first hadith I told you about is a shaving blade hadith. Make sure you remember that. Here's the second hadith you need to remember. The Prophet used to tell his companions, I don't want you to constantly tell me negative things about other people. Don't constantly tell me negative things about my companions. Why? Is that because when I go out and meet these people, I want to meet them wa ana salim sadr. I want to meet them and I have a clean heart towards them. Because if you keep dumping their faults in front of me and keep flaunting their shortcomings, next time I meet that person, my heart is tainted. This happens with siblings a lot. Like I'll have a brother and two brothers in the class, and like one brother will come up to me like, Brother Ameer, did you know my brother got suspended? And he's got this smile on his face, smirk. I was like, why? First of all, why are you smiling? Why are you happy about his suffering? And secondly, why are you telling me? I don't need to know, because next time I meet your brother in the prayer hall, I don't want to look down on him because you threw shade. You know what I mean? And that's something as parents also, and to some degree I do it as a teacher, maybe call me naive, but I try not to put myself in a situation where I see the worst of humanity. Like I teach high school, there are certain parts of the hallways, if you're there, you might lose faith in humanity. It can happen. I just try not to put myself in that situation where there are F-bombs being dropped or whatever, because I'm like, I'm just going to become bitter. My heart is going to become tainted. I got to focus on the potential that these kids have, not, when shaitan gets the better of them. So the Prophet ﷺ said also, don't keep telling me negative things, because I want to keep my heart clean. He wants to maintain his homeostasis. You get it? That's the struggle he's keeping. And to a great degree as a parent, you need to do that with your kids. A lot of parents and kids as well, they've built so much resentment towards each other that particularly in our Desi households, inshallah, you guys are, mashallah, religious and enlightened, so you don't have to deal with these problems. But I've been in Desi homes when the father and the son are sitting in the living room and you can hear the crickets. So awkward. And if there is any conversation from the father to the son, is one of three things. Is either evaluating, comparing and contrasting, issuing commands, or forbidding something. There's no peer-to-peer conversation at all, because there's so much baggage has been, so much luggage is on the heart. They can't have normal conversation, and a lot of them are like ticking time bombs. One wrong thing was said, and someone's gonna blow up. And that needs to be addressed, y'all, in ways. Maybe you need a therapist. Maybe you need family counseling. I know those things are tabooed in our community. A lot of us live in denial. Man, you got to do what you got to do. You got to lighten the hearts. That's the policy my wife and I have made. If we've been married for like 7 or 8 years. We've had a lot of painful conversation. But if anything rubs us the wrong way, we address it. We do not pretend it doesn't exist. We don't live in a fog. Be precise with your speech. Face it. That's how you breathe life into your relationship with akhlaq and adab and politeness. But that's very, very important. And the last thing for my talk, inshallah, and that is to give you a little bit of motivation to keep your heart clean, as hard as it is. And folks, like in our community, I know cases where a brother has not spoken to their brother for 5 years, 10 years, or some business problem, and family ties are cut completely. There was a story I heard, I think it was in Pakistan. Sorry if all the bad stories are happening in Pakistan, forgive me. So there was a brother and a brother, they haven't talked to each other for 10, 20 years over some dispute that occurred. And then, even on Eid, they don't see each other. One day, one of the brothers gets the news that the other one passed away. And now you got to face, right? Avoided all these years, now you got to face. Knocks on the door. Family opens the door. He comes, and when he sees the dead body of his brother lying there, all the pent-up emotions of 20 years come flooding out. And he lunges on the body of his brother to finally give him a hug. Still blood at the end of the day, And they said that with all the feelings that were flooding out, his soul came out too, and he died on the body of his brother. And I'm like, must it be a tragedy that's going to compel you to clean your heart? Or can we call up a relative now and say, you know what, I'll be the bigger person. Just apologize, man. I know sometimes apologizing is like getting stomach ulcer. It's painful, right? Or like giving a compliment to your wife. That's also very difficult for our Desi brothers and sisters. Very tough. It hurts. It's like pulling teeth. I know. It's hard. We all struggle. Struggle is real. But that was the situation, folks. So anyway, back to the last point that I wanted to make is to give you some motivation about cleaning up the heart and just letting go of this luggage. Once our Prophet ﷺ was sitting in the masjid, and he points to the corner of the masjid at probably the door. He says, يَطَّلِعُ عَلَيْكُمْ الْآنْ مِنْ هَذَا الْفَجْرِ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ. Famous hadith. He says, a person from the people of Jannah is about to show up upon you. Everybody's heads turn. And this typical Ansari walks in with shoes in his hands, subhanAllah, humble person. And everybody's like in awe. Next day, the Prophet did the same thing. He's like, a person of Jannah is about to walk in. Everybody looks, it's the same person. So Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he's like, you know what, let me see what's so special about this guy. So he goes in and he's like, hey, can I like crash with you? I'll sleep on the couch, it's okay. And so he seeks his permission and he stays 3 days with him. Typically the Arab custom was, and to some degree in Islam as well, 3 days of hospitality is like almost owed. It's like your guest's right. So he hosts him for 3 days and he's observing him keenly as possible, but doesn't really see anything out of the ordinary. This person doesn't even pray tahajjud that much. He's not like super long in his prayers. So after 3 days are over, he finally owns up. He has to have that awkward conversation. He's like, look, man, the reason I stayed with you, I gotta be real with you, and I'm not saying you're not special, but it's just that I didn't come across something that would strike me as something that qualifies you for the label of Jannah. And the Ansari is, subhanAllah, so humble. He's like, look, I'm an open book. I am what you saw. But if there's anything that I can point my finger to that perhaps explains why the Prophet said what he said, is that I go to sleep every night and I have a routine. And that routine is that I make sure that I have no ghish. I have no ill feeling towards anyone else. I clean my heart, I try to forgive, and I don't carry any jealousy in my heart for what Allah has given somebody else. That's my internal routine every night. I let it go. I lighten the load. I flush it out. When Abdullah ibn Amr heard that, he's like, that's what's giving you the edge. That's where we're not able to compete with you. So, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lighten the loads of your heart, to give you a qalbun salim, a heart that is at peace, the heart that is pulsating with Allah's love and fear, the heart that is tender and is not hardened because of the grudges and the hatred and the negativity that we end up carrying. Allahumma ighfir lana warhamna wa tajawaz an sayyi'atina wa tawaffana ma'al abrar. Any questions? First question is the most awkward. Someone needs to break the ice. Yes, Dr. Obra.
Your wife would want to know exactly how many years you're married, not 7 to 8, but...
You want to know how many years exactly?
No, I'm saying your wife is wondering.
Oh yeah.
7 to 8, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it needs to be like the fourth place decimal, you know? Any questions? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Sheikh, how do we deal with the youth, with their habit related to social media, being social media on all the time, and who knows what they're doing and what they're not doing? How do we address that?
Oh man, the elephant in the room. Okay, so if I understood the question correctly, what do we do with the social media usage of our kids? I recommend a couple things, a couple tips for you. I feel like you need to have there's a really good book called 7 Habits of the Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He recommends having what he calls a family mission statement, where you take your kids out, whatever you got to do, isolate, and have a family plan, a family discussion about who are we as a family. Are we people who are disciplined? Are we religious? What are we? We need to get some values down as a collaborative process. No involvement, no commitment. So you don't want to have a top-down approach where you're like, all right, kids, here's what we're going to do. My way or highway. No. We can't do that. It has to be a collaborative approach where you get them to think. They also have a fitrah. They understand right from wrong. And there's a conversation that needs to take place, and then boundaries need to be set. You have to have a very hands-on approach. The thing is, parents, a lot of us, and my wife and I are constantly struggling with this. You see, the iPad and the screen time, it's like a tranquilizer. Yeah, if your kid's giving you a hard time, here, put up the cartoon in front of him, and for 2 good hours, you will not hear a sound or a peep or nothing. So it's an incredible, it's like a babysitter, yeah, except for free. So a lot of parents have spoiled their kids with so much screen time that now for us to expect them to be completely yanked is just you're not gonna go cold turkey overnight. So there's gonna have to be a conversation around setting boundaries, and you're gonna have to lead by example. And a lot of investment needs to be made in those family bonds, whether it's eating together, having meals together. The immense benefits of having a meal together are so well documented right now. So that's the first thing, having a family mission statement, have a family collaborative discussion where you set those boundaries, and then brainstorm with them the consequences of breaking those boundaries. That's also very important. Whether it's losing their cell phones, some privileges, that needs to be completely discussed. Another thing I tell parents, you need to tell your kids, I love you and I trust you, but I'm also monitoring you. And that's not to take away from my trust in you. There should be a software on those phones, on their computers, where you're monitored, and they should know you're monitoring, because pornography is unbelievably rampant. 80%, 70%. It's at literally a click away. And sometimes you may be searching something innocuous and innocent and benign, and it takes you in that direction. And addictions develop. We need to have a very open conversation. Hum desi log, us desi people, we're very, what's the word I'm looking for? We're really formal when it comes to these taboo conversations, Who wants to have talk with their kid, My family and I, we never had a conversation around pornography, ever. We all know it exists and how closely available it is. We need to talk to them. You have to get over your cringiness. You need to get over that informality, because if they're not talking to you, who are they talking to? So part of the work needs to be done by the parents, where they need to be a more hands-on parent. They need to put into the emotional bank account of their kid, have that collaborative process, that family mission statements, brainstorm boundaries, brainstorm consequences. Now, if they violate, they agree to it. And you have to hold your ground and don't let compassion swerve you. So, but set boundaries, very, very, very importantly. Figure out what's right. Same thing goes for video games, by the way. After a while, it's corrosive and dangerous, So hopefully that, inshallah, helps you. Yes.
Just in general, what your advice, how to make your heart more secure with Allah? What is probably the method will help you to achieve that?
Wow. What do you do to achieve a level of closeness with Allah? You're almost asking, how do you soften your heart towards Allah, yeah? There are a variety of ways. Everybody's different. It's kind of like one medicine doesn't really work for everybody, but here are some things to try. I recommend to people, especially if you know how to read the Quran, in the morning after Fajr, you sit down, preferably in your balcony or in a place where you have access to nature, and you recite the Quran out loud and you beautify your voice. It has a very incredible therapeutic effect. Try it. and then get back to me on that. That's one thing you can try. Secondly, find a reciter or a nasheed that gets you in that spiritual zone. Everybody has a surah. At least you should have a nasheed artist that puts you in that zone. I have a playlist that, like, if I'm feeling like a little dry spiritually, just put it on and it just puts me in a what I call a tearful mode or solemn or melancholy mood. You should have something like that at your disposal. Third, there's nothing that brings you closer to Allah faster than knowledge of Allah and His Messenger. So having a steady dose of seerah, which you are like a podcast that you constantly listen to, that is very, very important. Or an explanation of the Quran. People, when they ask me, I'm trying to become religious, what do? I recommend two things, Quran and seerah. By Quran, I say go on YouTube, look up explanation of Surah Fatiha, because you're going to recite that the most, by Ustad Nouman Ali Khan. And then start listening to that. Now you're drinking from a fountain, a divine fountain, really. And then listen to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. There's one by Shaykh Nasr Qadi. There's one by my teacher, Ustad Abdurrahman Murphy, which is unbelievably effective, especially for young people. Seerah, Quran. Consistent infusion of knowledge will transform you. You don't want spikiness, you know? Like one day you're like, oh, I'm feeling religious today, I'm just going to knock out like 5 hours of lectures or something. And then you're like MIA for the next 2 weeks. You don't want spikes. Studies show that reading 10 pages a day is far more effective for behavioral change than anything else. So same thing here. Consistent, steady dosage of spirituality through Quran and Seerah will go a long way. Long way. Last thing I recommend, being vulnerable with Allah. What I mean by this is that putting your head, if you're staying up late, try this. It really is profound. Make a really good wudu. Make sure you're not distracted by anything. You almost need to like give yourself a 20 minute cutoff, or what's the word I'm looking for? 20-minute break from social media and distractions. Because your heart is not like a microwave. It's more like an oven. It needs to slowly kind of transition out of it. Anyway, you give yourself that break. You make a really good wudu. You pray 2 rak'ahs. And now when your head is down, you start thinking of what Allah does for you versus what you do for Allah. And the blessings you've been given, how you're bathing in His blessings, and what you're doing in return, and your sins. And now you start talking, and you become vulnerable, and you pour your heart out. It is insanely effective. So a lot of men particularly, we have a hard time expressing our feelings, you know? You need to start pouring your heart out to Allah. That's going to really, inshallah, soften you up and knock off that rust on the heart, inshallah. What else, folks? Sister in the back. Yeah, there's a lot out there. So one of the top items on Shaitan's agenda, Allah tells us in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ الشَّيْطَانِ, and what Shaitan really wants, أَن يُوقِعَ بَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ. He wants to sow the seeds of hatred and baghdad, the same baghdad the Prophet warned you about. He wants to put the seeds of hatred, deep-seated resentment in your heart. That's an ayah of the Quran for you. Also the famous hadith that some of you have come across, that Shaitan holds a meeting. And in that meeting, all his minions slowly report the damage they've done to humanity for that day. And somebody's like, I caused this and I caused that, and Shaitan's like, thumbs up. And then finally someone comes up and he says, today I put so much bad blood between a husband and a wife that I caused a divorce. Shaitan gives this person a hug. He's like, you're the man of the hour. You'll get the MVP trophy, So that's another hadith that you can kind of register. Third hadith that comes to mind, the Prophet ﷺ said, narrated by Zubair ibn Awam, Dabba ilaykum. Habit of the people of the past will creep up upon you as well. And that is, once again, he says, Baghdad. There's people carrying angst in their hearts and never checking them and never addressing them. A lot of people are not even aware of the smear and the smudges on their hearts that accumulate because of crazy expectations they carry from people. And then they are constantly let down, and then the luggage starts to add up, and the rest starts to add up, and they never let that go. I'm just trying to make you aware right now, is at least you start monitoring the fact that, hey, you know what, I'm getting a lot of ill feelings towards that person, they keep adding up, let me not hold on to this. It's not healthy. And there was a study done on NFL players, it was just shocking, where they made them go through this meditative exercise where they think of one person who's really backstabbed them and hurt them and whatever, and they tried to get them to forgive them. There's a whole meditative practice that you can look up about letting go and forgiving. One player, when they successfully did that, when they measured their vertical improved by a couple inches because of the forgiveness exercise they went through. Like, you actually physically and mentally and spiritually become lighter. You feel better. So you want to improve your well-being, inshallah, that's a great place to start, inshallah. Yes.
What about in cases of trauma and abuse?
Tra-
That are still, especially if it's still persisting.
Yeah, that's a look. In cases of trauma and abuse, first of all, in Islam, you're not required to forgive, right? If you cannot forgive someone, there's a reason why Allah says in the Quran, وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِمْ. One of the delights of Jannah or perks of Jannah is that Allah says we will pull out of their heart the deep-seated resentment, because that sometimes it's so deep into your psyche you can't actually remove it. So in the case of trauma and dealing with that, I'll share with you what psychologists write. There's a really good book by Jordan Peterson, The 12 Rules of Life. One of the rules is, if you are a trauma survivor, then to the best of your ability, you write it down, you talk it out, and you have someone professional help you manage it. It may not fully go away, and that's okay, but at least it'll take the edge off. And you constantly spiritually remind yourself that the reason you're forgiving that person, or not maybe forgiving that person, you're letting it go because you want God to let certain things go about you. So the famous story in the Seerah when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was financially supporting somebody, that somebody was slandering his daughter. And the whole scandal of Aisha occurred, unfortunately. After the culprits were revealed, and we figured out who's actually behind the scenes doing this, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wanted to pull the financial support. Allah revealed an ayah. Allah says, وَلَا يَأْتَلِ أُولُو الْفَضْلِ مِنْكُمْ. Let the people of virtue and piety and wealth, let them not, pull funding from people who are poor and people of family who actually genuinely need it. And how did Allah justify it? He says, وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَحُوا. Take it easy and overlook. Do you not love that Allah forgive you and not hold grudges against you? We all got skeletons in our closet. And look, one thing that I motivate myself is that, look, I want Allah to keep His anger away from me, so I keep it away from people. I want Allah to forgive me, so to the degree possible, you forgive others. But seek professional help if it's a deep-seated case of abuse and trauma. To the best of your ability, process it out. Will yourself to power, manage it to the degree possible, remind yourself of the virtues of forgiveness and how you're actually being selfish when you're forgiving. That's the whole point I'm making here. It's not even a selfless act, technically. You are, it's not how they say in English, like sometimes jealousy and trauma and like living in that, it's almost like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. They're not being affected, You have to let it go because you're making yourself lighter. So hopefully some of these things will help you achieve relief. I ask Allah to make things easy for you. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Yes.
I'm looking for some reassurance here. Just before the verses you quoted, Ibrahim alayhi salam said, "La tukhzini yawma yub'athun." Disgrace me not on the day. And he is saying that. What hope is there for us? If someone like him says that before the Qalb Salim.
وَلَا تُخْزِنِي يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ. There's a context to that verse though. Where the context to that verse is that Ibrahim a.s. says, Ya Allah, do not humiliate me on the day of judgment. And he's actually referring to his father. He's like, Ya Allah, if he doesn't believe, then on the day of judgment, what's going to happen? So he was more so worried from that perspective. But you're right, there is a case to be made that prophets of God are scared too. Especially on the day of judgment, when the day of judgment won't start and they're going to go from prophet to prophet, and every prophet is going to be like, Ibrahim a.s. will say, I lied 3 times. Now those weren't technically lies if you know his story. There was just like, you can say stretching the truth or white lies. And he did that for the sake of Allah. But he's like, today Allah is angry and I don't know what's going to come up. So even the prophets of God are scared. And that speaks to their piety and spirituality. The prophets are not entitled to salvation. A lot of us, especially in our community, especially in the Palestinian community, this is a big issue where they're operating liquor stores. In Chicago area, you go, and in Milwaukee as well, you go to certain parts, dozens of liquor stores, all Muslim owned. You're like, what the heck's going on here? Is nobody worried about the hereafter? You to go talk to these people. Are they like atheists? Like, what happened to these people? You know what they say, right? Inna Allah ghafurur rahim. Allah bada Rahman Rahim, God will forgive. I got kids to feed, bills to pay, and they have their whole, litany of excuses they will throw at you. But there's this weird conception of God that somehow we're going to get bailed out on the day of judgment. I do, I do Taraweeh, and I'll go to Hajj, and I'll write a big fat check to the fundraiser, and then I'll be okay. There's almost entitlement to salvation, being comfortable sinning. Remember, that's not a Salim heart. So there is a case to be made that you don't want to become entitled to spirituality, but at the same time, this is like, I'll end on this, so I'm not rambling on. As a believer, there's a tightrope you constantly walk. At times, you're exposing yourself to the fact that every surah of the Quran begins with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, the name of Allah, the most gracious and the most merciful. That Allah forgives someone who killed 99 people. That Allah, hadith comes in Tirmidhi, unbelievable hadith, that the Prophet is having a conversation with Jibreel. And he says, Ya Rasulullah, if you could only see me when the Pharaoh was about to drown. And his mouth was moving. And I rushed to stuff dirt in his mouth in case he seeks forgiveness and mercy of Allah will descend even upon him. You hear that? And you're like, you know what? Inshallah, we have a chance. But then, there are verses, there are names of Allah that evoke the fear side. Kind of like the things that I mentioned earlier, and you're like, I don't know if I have a chance. So as a believer, you're constantly in that type, that medium, where you're not too complacent spiritually, but you're not despondent either. And you're in that state, that tension state, where you're constantly balancing your fear of Allah and your love for Allah. Where Allah is at once your protective friend, but He's also your king. And He's your protective friend that you pour your heart out to, great. And He's also your king. So when you're on the verge of disobeying Him, you don't chill with your king. That's a king who commands you. So you constantly balance fear and hope. As Ibn Qayyim said beautifully, right? Your flight to Allah is like that of a bird. Head is love, but then the two wings are fear and hope. If even one of the wings is missing, you can't have a stable flight. We need both. And you got to balance that out constantly. Inshallah. Yes.
About what forgiveness really looks like. Like I'm thinking about people who will say, it's very easy to say the words, I forgive you. And then the next time there's an argument, they're bringing out every single thing that happened like for the past 5 years.
Yeah, look, I'll give you my definition of it. My definition of forgiveness is you're no longer negatively charged towards that person. So let me give you an example. There are students, and I'm not proud to say this, but it's true. There's some students who are disrespectful to me publicly, I see that person in the hallway, I don't want to say salam because I'm negatively charged. I'm just avoiding like that. Now I'm working on it. I'm letting it go. I'm like, teenagers, their brain is still under construction and whatever. So you tell yourself that, but I'm still negatively charged, So so if you want to see if you've truly forgiven someone or someone has truly forgiven you, is to see if they're still negatively charged towards you, And that's really ultimately what you're letting go of, is that you no longer feel a negative sense of energy when you're around that person. And it's tough, man. No, what? Forgiveness does not mean you're condoning their behavior, though. Forgiveness is that I no longer choose to be affected by what that person did to me. It's no longer going to govern and suffocate my life. That's basically the idea. A really good resource for you, if you ever want to make further progress, there's a person by the name of Vishen Lakhiani. He's a founder of Mind Valley. Look up Vishen and forgiveness. He goes through this entire exercise and first of all, the scientific benefits of forgiveness. And also he walks through a 10-minute exercise that's really profound, where he actually helps you visualize a court scene. Walks you through multiple steps where, I'm going to butcher this, but let me just appetize you at least to some degree. You're in a court scene where you're standing in front of the person who did you wrong, and you're literally reading out the charges. You're letting all your anger out, all of it. And then he helps you then visualize certain things from that person's perspective, and there's about 9 steps to go through. Check that out, and inshallah, you'll find that to be very substantive and non-cliched, and I hope that it will be a means of help and clarity, inshallah. Yes?
Last summative question to have summarized. Is it easier to know your heart is Salim or easier to know it's not?
Is it easier to know if it's Salim or if it's easier to know? What do you mean by know here? No, I'm not trying to get philosophical, but
It's our awareness to get further on the journey to get to Salim.
Yeah.
Is it easier to know one's on the right path or one's missing it?
I think it's going to depend on a person's temperament. So psychologically, we know some people experience more positive emotions, some experience more negative emotions. Ladies tend to be much higher in what we call neuroticism. the negative emotions. By negative emotions, I mean guilt, shame, self-consciousness. That tends to be, psychological studies, multiple surveys have shown that women tend to be higher in that. Particularly, by the way, something you should know as a parent, when puberty occurs, girls will feel far more negative emotions than guys would in the same age. Before puberty is pretty much the same, but after puberty, you'll see a shoot up for girls. And a lot of girls, they don't know what to do. They're like, they're broken, or they're like, something's wrong with them. It's not. It's actually your body getting you ready. I know it's not politically correct to say this, but your neurology, your psychology is literally built for this. Your body is getting you ready for infant care. And part of infant care is that you experience a lot of negative emotions because it makes you more attuned to your environment. So your threat detection is higher when you experience a lot of negative emotions. That's basically the point that I'm making. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just conveying the science behind it. Now, I tell you this because some people have their serotonin and dopamine built in a way where they experience more positive emotions than others. Why am I telling you this? Is that if you're more attuned to negativity, you're going to tend to spot when you're going off the path a lot more than someone who experiences more positive emotions, and they tend to kind of make excuses for themselves, give themselves benefit of the doubt. So ultimately, it's going to be a person-to-person thing, but you should look for signs, look for litmus tests. That's the ultimate thing. You're looking to see, when was the last time I made a heartfelt dua? It's a good sign. That's a good pulse. You're a doctor. You take certain vitals, yes? You take certain spiritual vitals, and to see, like, when was the last time I cried? Has that ever happened? So, did I cry last Ramadan? When was the last time I touched the Quran? Has it been collecting shells, collecting dust since the last Ramadan? So you look for the fact, when was the last time you cried? You look for the fact, when was the last time you felt chills? You check the fact, when was the last time you made a really deep dua? Those are some spiritual signs to look out for. What else I can tell you? When was the last time you had a really good prayer? Those are things to look out for to get your spiritual vitals. And none of those things are true, then you need to do something. You need a spiritual reset or a jump start almost, Also look for the negative signs. If you're feeling a lot of hatred, a lot of resentment for somebody, those are things to look out for, inshallah. Maybe we'll do two more because we don't want to torture people for too long. Are there any more questions, folks? Maybe that was the last one. Going once? Going twice? Okay, we have second last question. Yes.
How would you recommend what advice to give to someone on how to reach
Can you define what you mean by tawakkul, if that's okay? I mean, we all know what it is, but people have their personalized definitions. I see. So let me rephrase your question and see if I understood this. I think what you're asking is that how do I reach a state, like a mental framework almost, where I can constantly view life as if Allah is in charge. Eventually things will work out. They may seem down now, but someone's behind the wheels. Yeah? Things are not randomly unfolding. God has a plan for me, even if I can't make sense of it right now, right? Is that some? Okay. To build tawakkul, so there's certain things in our deen, it's like a muscle. And you have to work that muscle out for it to get stronger. So patience is like that. Patience is a muscle that needs to be strengthened. Willpower is like that. Hilm is like that. Tawakkul is also that. You grow in levels of tawakkul. Now, one thing that really, really helps is history. Where you see Allah's plan working out for the Prophet ﷺ, for the Sahaba, for the righteous. Listening to the battles the Muslims won against all odds, that really strengthens your conviction that, you know what? There's more than what meets the eye. There's an architect of human events that's shaping all of this. There's a divine hand that's guiding all of this. So history really, really helps. Biographies really help. I would say another thing that helps is keeping track of your du'as and seeing those du'as coming true. Not all du'as come true for reasons that are known to Allah, but keeping track of your du'as and journaling about them and using that as a way to bolster. Reading Quran is very, very important, especially with explanation, because this is something that Allah talks about all the time. That Wallahu ghalibun ala amri. In the story of Joseph, Yusuf alayhi salam, you're aware of the story. Initially, he got thrown, as you know, he was backstabbed by his brothers, then he was thrown down the well. Now, if you were to zoom in onto his life right then and there, you're like, what a tragedy. How random. Random suffering, pointless suffering. Little kid thrown down the well, separated from parents, is about to be sold in slavery. Nothing makes sense when you zoom in because you're stuck in the pixels, so you're not looking at the picture. You're lost in the, as I said earlier today, you're lost in the trees, you're losing the forest. But if you were to zoom out, Allah says, Wallahu ghalibun ala amri. Allah was dominant over his affair the whole time, even though you may not see. So listening, reading the Quran, seeing that Allah says, وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِي وَيُرْسِلُ عَلَيْكُمْ حَفْظًا. Allah is firmly in charge of the affairs of his servants, and he actually sends down protectors for you. The guardian angels that protect you. Mujahid says, these angels protect you from any danger that is not meant for you. Even if an ant is about to crawl into your ear in the middle of the night, they shoo it away if it's not written for you. So those are things that you expose yourself to knowledge, and inshallah, slowly but surely, and through lived human experience, you grow in your relationship, inshallah. It's so beautiful. When you get closer to Allah, you get dreams. Yeah, more pious you are, more spiritual dreams you get. I don't want to go on my tangents, but you guys might really benefit from this. Sheikh Bilal Asad from Australia, he lost his son in front of his eyes. His son was driving a snowmobile, and the throttle got stuck, crashed into a wall, and died in front of him. And he says, as I'm lowering the body of my son into the grave, literally I wanted to bash my head on the walls of the grave. It was supposed to be him lowering my body, not the other way around. But he said something really beautiful. He's like, when you're in the middle of a hardship like that, Allah doesn't abandon you. وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. He's with you wherever you are. So he said, I would see these dreams multiple times of my own child, meeting him, asking him how he's doing. You get beautiful, beautiful dreams. You get people reaching out to you never expect. There's a ma'iyah of Allah that kind of descends, So, inshallah, Allah will guide you through ways that you know, inshallah. All right, folks, I had capacity for one more question, if there is any. So we have a last question here, inshallah.
This could be like similar to what we just went through.
Uh-huh.
How do you train yourself that we always have a lens of gratitude when we go through our daily life? And then how do we fight the form over substance, where not just doing more rakas of du'as, more and longer sajdas, but we don't generate that sense of gratitude, a sense of the lens that we view things like we don't see that blessings or don't have that gratitude.
Okay, so a couple of things there. There's a psychologist from Stanford University. His name is Andrew Huberman. Look him up. He has a really good podcast on best gratitude practices. Look into that. He's like really into hacks and, giving you the best psychological, scientific evidence. So check that out to give you the best, latest research on it. Ultimately, things, I think you made a profound point. How do you go from form to actual substance? Being able to get into your feels, being able to dig down into the depths of your heart, that gets easier the more you do it. There needs to be a practice, though, a regular habit of it. Just like with working out, you're spiritually working out here. So, you can't go to the gym one day and you're like, you went to gym one day and you came out there like, why is my muscles are not sore yet? Like, you understand. So similarly, there needs to be a daily, consistent, anchored routine that you need to have. This is my practice. If you guys want to plagiarize it, you're totally more than welcome. So the way I do it, I pray Fajr. My goal is to read Quran for about 5 to 10 pages, out loud, beautify your voice, ideally in the balcony. And then I do a 5 minutes of gratitude practice. It is beautiful. It sets you up for the day. Your well-being levels will be amazing. And the thing about gratitude practice is you close your eyes and you reflect over your last 48 hours and you be specific about your micro blessings, and you revel in that. You relive it. And that's where it really, really does wonders for your neurology and psychology. So focusing, training, constantly doing it, after a while, you become better. And it's easy for you to summon those chills, summon those deep states of the mind and the heart. But the reward is where the heart is. And being able to access the depth of your heart is a skill that you get better at. But I recommend that you have a consistent routine, inshallah, and you'll see over a period of time it really blossoms, inshallah. All right, folks, with this, subhanallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.